Shalom, my friend. Once a law is revealed, governance begins. This is not a request. This is not a suggestion. This is structural reality operating within the fabric of creation itself. When Torah unveils a principle, when understanding penetrates your awareness, when clarity replaces confusion, you have crossed a threshold from which there is no return. The moment you comprehend how order functions, you become subject to its oversight. Most people believe that knowledge protects them. They accumulate understanding like armor, thinking that awareness shields them from consequence. Torah reveals the opposite truth. Understanding a law places you directly under its authority. Knowledge does not exempt you from accountability. It creates accountability. This is the governance law, and today we examine why order demands oversight, why revelation increases responsibility, and why your soul now operates under a different set of requirements than it did before you understood what you now understand. Before anything is governed, it is inspected. Governance never begins with force. It begins with examination. We will return to that later. Let me define governance with precision, because most people confuse governance with control, punishment, fear, or moral pressure. Governance is none of these things. Governance is structural oversight applied after revelation. It is the systematic administration of order once that order has been made known. When an architect reveals the blueprint of a building, construction cannot proceed without supervision. The blueprint itself creates the requirement for oversight. The same principle operates in every dimension of existence. What is revealed must be monitored. What is understood must be managed. What is made known becomes subject to examination. God does not govern your ignorance. He governs your awareness. This is why children operate under different laws than adults, why beginners receive different treatment than masters, why those who know little bear lighter responsibility than those who know much. The structure of reality itself adjusts its requirements based on what you comprehend. Think about this carefully. A person who has never seen a traffic light cannot violate traffic laws. But once that same person understands how traffic signals function, they become accountable to every intersection they encounter. The knowledge itself created the accountability. The revelation established the governance. This is not emotional. This is not moral. This is structural. Order cannot remain unmanaged once it has been revealed. Systems cannot function without oversight once their operations have been explained. Authority cannot exist without accountability once awareness has been established. In Torah, we see this principle operating from the very beginning. Adam and Eve operated under simple parameters until they gained knowledge of good and evil. The moment they understood moral distinction, governance increased. Their accountability expanded. Their responsibility multiplied. The knowledge itself triggered the oversight. This is why neutrality ends once structure is known. You cannot claim ignorance after revelation. You cannot return to innocence after understanding. You cannot pretend you do not know what you now know. The law has been revealed, and revelation creates requirement. Consider why God governs what he reveals. This is not arbitrary. This is not capricious. This is the natural consequence of structural order. When God reveals a principle, he is sharing the blueprints of reality. Once you possess these blueprints, you become a participant in construction, not merely an observer of results. What is known must be monitored because knowledge creates capability, and capability creates responsibility. What is built must be overseen because construction requires standards, and standards require enforcement. What is entrusted must be examined because trust creates stewardship, and stewardship requires accountability. God does not rush people into revelation. He does not force awareness upon unprepared minds. But once awareness arrives, once understanding takes root, once clarity replaces confusion, governance follows automatically. This is not punishment. This is protection. Order without oversight collapses under its own weight. Authority always follows awareness because awareness creates the capacity for influence, and influence requires management. When you understand how systems work, you gain the ability to affect those systems. This ability cannot remain unmonitored. This capability cannot exist without accountability. Let me show you how the governance law operates in real-world applications, because this is not theoretical philosophy. This is practical structure affecting every dimension of your daily existence. In your finances, oversight replaces intention once you understand how money actually functions. When you comprehended compound interest, investment principles, and wealth-building strategies, your relationship with money changed permanently. You cannot now claim ignorance about financial consequence. Every dollar you spend, every investment you make, every financial decision you execute operates under governance because you know better. Your good intentions with money meant something when you did not understand financial principles, but intention cannot substitute for accountability once revelation has occurred. Your finances now require oversight, management, and systematic administration because you possess the knowledge to create different outcomes. In marriage and family relationships, accountability replaces assumption once you understand relational dynamics. When you learned about communication patterns, emotional cycles, and relational structures, you accepted responsibility for outcomes that ignorance previously excused. You cannot now claim that failed communication resulted from lack of understanding. You know how healthy relationships function. Your assumptions about your spouse's needs meant something when you operated without relational knowledge. But assumption cannot substitute for accountability once structure has been revealed. Your marriage now requires deliberate management, conscious oversight, and systematic attention because you understand what creates connection and what destroys it. In health and physical well-being, governed routines replace awareness once you understand how your body actually functions. When you learned about nutrition, exercise physiology, and wellness principles, you accepted responsibility for outcomes that ignorance previously justified. You cannot now claim that poor health resulted from lack of information. You know what creates vitality and what destroys it. Your general awareness of health meant something when you operated without understanding bodily systems. But awareness cannot substitute for accountability once biological laws have been revealed. Your physical condition now requires systematic management, deliberate oversight, and structured implementation because you understand what creates health and what undermines it. In authority and leadership, standards replace charisma once you understand how influence actually operates. When you learned about leadership principles, organizational dynamics, and authority structures, you accepted responsibility for outcomes that ignorance previously overlooked. You cannot now claim that leadership failures resulted from natural personality limitations. You know what creates effective leadership and what corrupts it. Your charismatic influence meant something when you operated without understanding leadership systems. But charisma cannot substitute for accountability once authority principles have been revealed. Your leadership now requires systematic standards, measurable outcomes, and structural oversight because you understand what creates sustainable influence and what destroys it. In spiritual life, order replaces inspiration once you understand how spiritual principles actually function. When you learned about prayer, meditation, and spiritual disciplines, you accepted responsibility for outcomes that ignorance previously accepted as mysterious. You cannot now claim that spiritual dryness results from divine unpredictability. You know what creates spiritual connection and what blocks it. Your spiritual inspiration meant something when you operated without understanding spiritual laws. But inspiration cannot substitute for accountability once spiritual structure has been revealed. Your spiritual life now requires systematic order, deliberate practice, and structured oversight because you understand what creates spiritual growth and what prevents it. This is the uncomfortable truth that serious people must face. What is not governed will decay, even if it is understood. Knowledge without governance creates liability, not benefit. Understanding without oversight produces chaos, not order. You've seen this in every area where you possess knowledge but lack systematic management. Your health deteriorates despite knowing nutrition principles. Your relationships struggle despite understanding communication dynamics. Your finances remain chaotic despite comprehending wealth-building strategies. Knowledge alone provides no protection. Only governed knowledge produces sustainable results. This is why so many intelligent people live frustrated lives. They accumulate understanding without implementing governance. They gain awareness without accepting accountability. They learn principles without submitting to oversight. They want the benefits of revelation without the responsibilities of management. But Torah operates differently. In Torah, revelation creates requirement. Understanding establishes accountability. Knowledge triggers governance. This is not punishment. This is protection. Order cannot survive without systematic oversight. Consider the person who understands fitness principles but lacks structured workout routines. Their knowledge becomes a source of guilt rather than strength. Consider the person who comprehends relationship dynamics but avoids difficult conversations. Their understanding becomes a source of frustration rather than connection. Consider the person who knows financial principles but resists budgeting disciplines. Their awareness becomes a source of anxiety rather than security. Knowledge without governance creates internal conflict because your soul recognizes the gap between what you know and what you implement. This gap generates the cognitive dissonance that plagues educated people who live disordered lives. They know better, but they do not live better, and the tension between knowledge and practice creates perpetual unrest. Understanding did not fail you. Ungoverned knowledge did. If you understand that governance requires inspection, and you are ready to identify the structural cracks where your authority is leaking, a formal inspection protocol is available below. It is optional. It is not for everyone. Governance is not optional after revelation has occurred. Once you understand how systems work, you become responsible for implementing that understanding through structured oversight. Once awareness penetrates your consciousness, you become accountable for translating that awareness into systematic practice. Once knowledge enters your mind, you become liable for managing that knowledge through deliberate governance. This is why God reveals truth gradually rather than all at once. Total revelation without corresponding governance capacity would crush the unprepared soul. But partial revelation with systematic governance builds the strength necessary for increased responsibility. Each level of understanding creates new requirements for oversight. Each phase of awareness establishes additional accountability. The people who thrive under Torah governance are those who welcome increased responsibility as the natural consequence of increased understanding. They do not resist accountability. They embrace it as protection against the chaos that ungoverned knowledge creates. They recognize that governance is not limitation, but liberation from the anxiety of unmanaged awareness. The people who struggle under Torah governance are those who want understanding without accountability, knowledge without responsibility, awareness without oversight. They accumulate information but resist implementation. They gain insights but avoid the systematic management those insights require. They prefer the illusion of growth through learning to the reality of growth through governance. But reality operates according to structural laws, not personal preferences. What you know must be managed. What you understand must be overseen. What you comprehend must be governed. This is not negotiable. This is the price of awareness, the cost of understanding, the requirement of knowledge. Accountability is the price of clarity, but clarity without accountability is worthless. Understanding that remains ungoverned produces frustration rather than fulfillment. Knowledge that lacks systematic management creates burden rather than benefit. Awareness that avoids structured oversight generates anxiety rather than peace. Your soul knows this intuitively. This is why you feel internal tension when you understand principles but fail to implement systems. This is why you experience restlessness when you gain awareness but avoid accountability. This is why you feel frustrated when you accumulate knowledge but resist governance. Your soul recognizes that ungoverned understanding violates the structural order of reality. Knowledge exists to be managed, not merely possessed. Understanding exists to be overseen, not merely accumulated. Awareness exists to be governed, not merely experienced. This is the difference between Phase 3 discovery and Phase 4 accountability. Phase 3 ends the moment understanding arrives. Phase 4 begins the moment responsibility is required. But in Phase 4, you focus on governing understanding, managing knowledge, and overseeing awareness. The goal is implementation, and success is measured by how systematically you operate. Most people remain stuck in Phase 3 because they prefer the excitement of discovery to the responsibility of governance. They enjoy learning new principles more than implementing systematic management. They find gaining awareness more stimulating than accepting accountability. But Phase 3, learning without Phase 4 governance, creates educated chaos rather than structured order. You are no longer in Phase 3. You understand too much to claim ignorance. You know too much to avoid responsibility. You comprehend too much to resist accountability. Governance is not optional. Oversight is not negotiable. Management is not voluntary. This does not mean that governance is burdensome. Proper governance feels like relief, not restriction. Systematic oversight creates freedom, not limitation. Structured management produces peace, not pressure. When you align with the natural requirements of governed knowledge, the internal tension disappears and sustainable progress begins. The burden comes from resisting governance, not from implementing it. The pressure comes from avoiding accountability, not from accepting it. The stress comes from fighting oversight, not from submitting to it. Ungoverned knowledge creates perpetual anxiety because your soul recognizes that you are operating outside the structural order of reality. Order survives only under oversight. This is true in every dimension of existence. Physical health survives only under systematic management of diet, exercise, and rest. Relational health survives only under deliberate oversight of communication, connection, and conflict resolution. Financial health survives only under structured management of income, spending, and investment. Spiritual health survives only under systematic oversight of prayer, study, and service. What you understand about each of these areas creates accountability in each of these areas. Your knowledge establishes your responsibility. Your awareness determines your requirements. Your understanding defines your obligations. This is not punishment. This is the natural structure of reality operating according to divine design. God does not impose arbitrary requirements. He reveals how things actually work, and working systems require systematic management. He does not create burdensome rules. He explains structural necessities, and necessary structures require deliberate oversight. Governance is not control imposed from outside. Governance is order implemented from understanding. When you comprehend how systems function, you naturally recognize the need for systematic management. When you understand structural requirements, you willingly accept accountability for implementation. When you see how order operates, you gratefully embrace the oversight that protects that order. The person who resists governance after revelation is like an architect who designs a building but refuses construction supervision. The blueprint exists, the understanding is present, but the systematic management necessary for successful implementation is rejected. The result is not freedom, but failure, not liberation, but collapse. Your life operates according to the same structural principles. What you understand about relationships must be systematically managed through deliberate communication practices. What you comprehend about health must be deliberately overseen through structured wellness routines. What you know about finances must be systematically governed through disciplined money management. What you understand about spiritual growth must be deliberately managed through systematic spiritual disciplines. This is not optional after revelation has occurred. This is the natural requirement of possessed knowledge operating within structural reality. Governance follows understanding as naturally as oversight follows awareness. To resist this is to resist reality itself, but to embrace this is to align with the fundamental order of existence. When you accept that knowledge creates accountability, when you welcome the governance that understanding requires, when you implement the systematic oversight that awareness demands, you begin operating in harmony with divine design rather than in conflict with structural reality. This harmony produces the peace that ungoverned knowledge cannot provide. This alignment creates the stability that unmanaged understanding cannot achieve. This cooperation generates the progress that unaccountable awareness cannot sustain. You now understand the governance law. Knowledge has been revealed, understanding has been established, awareness has been created. The question is not whether governance will occur. Governance is inevitable. The question is whether you will cooperate with the systematic oversight that your understanding requires, or whether you will resist the accountability that your knowledge has created. Resistance produces frustration, anxiety, anxiety and internal conflict. Cooperation produces peace, stability, and sustainable progress. The choice is yours, but the consequences follow structural law, not personal preference. Accountability is the price of clarity. Order survives only under oversight. Your soul is the blueprint. Your life is the construction. Shalom, my friend. Now let's build the life God designed for you.